Hello, welcome to our group collaboration kind of conversation that we're going to be having. My name's Rylan.
Emily.
And Brandon.
And so there we go. Basically, one of the main things I took away from this class was the differentiation of assessment that we can have, especially with the assignments that we did, instead of going straight from like making rubrics, making tests, so on and so forth. We kind of went into finding different ways of assessment, such as like making a comic strip, making a immersive reports, stuff like that. And I really found it really nice for me, especially because like I'm not one with really good writing skills, so on and so forth. But when it came to kind of making a creative media or something along that line, it really helped me out, and I thought it was really cool. And I would like to do that for my students. But yeah.
And then for myself, I found just something that really stuck out to me was the inclusion of students while we create rubrics, so including them while we create it. I thought that was like super important because this helps them to actually understand the assignment more and will possibly help them with better grades. And I never got an experience like that in high school or elementary, and I think that if I had actually had an experience like that, it would have actually like helped me, because like we would get rubrics, but I would never actually read them because I was just like, whatever. So I feel like if you actually create it with the students, they understand how more important it is and like how you can like actually reach the outcomes of the assignment.
Yeah, and then they actually have a better understanding of like what's expected, right? Because they had their voice in it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have like a similar takeaway of like including the students, but I think that's a great way of like, I think assessment should be motivating for the students. It shouldn't just be like, here's your grade and that's it. Like having the students involved within that process, I really saw that like connection between like this process of learning rather than just a one-stop, like there's a grade, that's the end of it. It's we're building and we're moving along this process, and the students are engaged and they're into it. So that's kind of what I took away from the class in that regard.
Yeah, no, exactly. Totally agree with that. Like if you have it where the student just gets their mark and they're like, oh, okay, whatever, and they don't actually kind of like look at the feedback, they don't look at anything, like that's kind of a real loss, because like you learn from your mistakes, right? Yeah. And like if you don't learn from your mistakes, then like you're really not learning or taking anything away from the actual class or like product that you're paid.
Yeah. And if you don't learn how to like use a rubric in high school, you're gonna come to university and you're gonna be like, well, what the heck is this?
Yeah, exactly. Well,
yeah.
In my pre-internship, especially, I kind of noticed that like students don't really care about like that process. It's just like, what's the grade? What am I getting?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Here it is. So like I feel like kind of like breaking down that approach, like the traditional approaches, and coming more of it from a standpoint of like, hey, it's your guys' learning. You're gonna take the ownership of it, and then they start to like focus less on like, okay, what's my grade, and more on like, what am I learning? How am I understanding it, and things like that. And it's like more of a, I think it's more holistic in that approach, and more just beneficial to them as like human beings to be able to learn instead of just focus on a product.
Yeah, absolutely. Like in my pre-internship, we had, like I was at a school that was very academic based, and the students, they were always like, okay, like is what's gonna be on the test, like blah blah blah, this like just trying to get like easiest way to get the marks. And so like I really tried to push that, or kind of not push that away, but like kind of change their viewpoint. And like what happened was we really focused in on just kind of the concepts, and then like made sure that they kind of like understood that. And through this, I mean, even though it's just like a standard written test, just the way I kind of like worded it or created it, really made sure that I like kind of focused in on those concepts, and like I gave them different opportunities, ways to like answer the question or whatever. So like whatever, as long as they got the content there, it was all good.
Yeah, that's exactly like what stood out to me during my pre-internship was like making adaptive assessments, because I didn't actually really do that at first. So I like made them a test, and then it was all like written, and then I noticed that this one student was like having a lot of like, he was struggling a lot, and then I let him like just actually say it to me instead of writing it out. So just like that tiny adaptation like really helped the student, and just like he had the content, he knew it, and so I was like, perfect, like as long as he can show the content. So it's just like making those adaptations.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is something I really learned from my experience in pre-internship.
Yeah, I saw that a lot actually with the EAL population at the school I was at. Like they smart as a whip, all of them. It's just they had trouble like writing it down in a way that like would make sense to us as the educators. But like they had the content there, they could easily show it, just not in the same way that everyone else could.
I think that's like a challenge that we're gonna have as like teachers, as to how do we know that a student grasps the content versus like there being just an inability to like through our assessment that we're using. Like, do they not know it, or is it just the assessment that's like kind of hindering their ability to express their knowledge?
Yeah.
And like I think with that, like that's why we have so many different forms of like formative assessment, right? You can use questions for like deeper understanding. You can literally have your worksheets. You could get like little presentations here and there, act sheets. For me personally, I really kind of use like performance tags or tasks like anecdotal records and questionings for like deeper understanding. Just because like those are like little things you can always do like whenever, like just as a habit as a teacher, and like that can give you a really good basis of where the students are at, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and you can like just go along with them with those, see if like you need to recover something, go over it again. Yeah, I really like the formative assessments.
So how would like, as like when we thinking back to like when we were students, do you think like that has an impact on like how we approach assessment in any way? Like, has it impacted your assessment?
Oh, it absolutely did. Originally, my my assessment philosophy was very final product based. I didn't care kind of about the process of learning. All I cared is that they were able to get the content, what they knew in their head, across to me in whatever way, shape, or form. And I didn't really care like about differentiation. I'm like, okay, everybody's gonna write the same thing, and like that way it's easier for me as an educator. But it's not that easy. I've realized that now. Especially, what was it, the one story about like trying to get a fish to climb a tree.
Yeah.
Right? So I feel like that story's got a lot of kind of like hold on assessment, especially nowadays, especially when we have such a diverse population. But yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like the more we teach, the more we will figure out how to make like proper assessments for each of our students, and we'll learn them faster, like our students, and how they can present what they know and everything like that. Just takes time.
Yeah. It's something we're for sure gonna learn like as we go in the field. I don't think like any class can actually 100% fully prepare you for what you're gonna experience, especially when it comes to like just as students. Like each student is totally different, and like you're gonna have to modify little things you do every day just to make sure that you get across to them all. And like there's no one pill fix all kind of thing out here, but you just gotta do what you best and be able to adapt on the fly.
I think that was like a big thing like that I learned throughout this, because like when I was a student, like through high school, even at like university before I entered education, it was very like that positivist, like right versus wrong. We write a test, and that shows if you don't do it on the test, you don't know anything, you're not smart. And that was kind of my approach coming into this class. I was very much like, yeah, that's how you do things. Like test, there's nothing wrong with the test. Like I still don't think there's something wrong with the test. It's just the way we implement a test. And instead of having just those like concrete answers, offering like opportunities to expand on content and like utilize information, but also make meaning from that information, and how like students would make, because there's multiple ways you can interpret one fact.
Absolutely.
So I think there's just like that's the biggest shift I've kind of had, is like from my own experience of like being in like that positivist thing to like kind of my journey into like constructivism, and like how like helping students like, construct knowledge rather than just teaching at them, having them like putting the learning onto them and having them like really take ownership of like the information that they're given.
And I feel like with like the students constructing knowledge, it's like a really good way to help them get ready for like the 21st century competencies and like incorporating it. So like having formative and summative assessments that can like kind of assess them and we can kind of evaluate them with like 21st competencies. So like on just like critical thinking or creativity.
Exactly, and that goes back to Bloom's hierarchy of need, or not needs, right? Hierarchy or something. Whereas we have the higher orders of thinking, the HOTS up top, and then you got your lower order of thinking below, which is like your memorization, stuff like that. So when we're doing our assessments, we really want to be hitting those higher order of thinking skills or topics. Because like if you have like true or false like question, like it's 50-50 if they don't know it, and there's no actual like thinking like process or like even not even a true like real world connection all the time. So like when we really think, especially when it comes to the 21st like century competencies, that we kind of want to take everything we learn or like our assessments with outcomes and relate them to real life situations. We always need to do that, and like that way we can always kind of hit those like 21st century competencies.
In your guys' pre-internships, like you taught like phys ed classes, right?
Yeah.
Phys ed.
So what are your thoughts on like a lot of the times like in my experience it was a very like traditional like form of assessment, and there wasn't a lot of like incorporation of like technology, collaboration, communication, critical thinking, or even innovation and creativity. Like it was very I found that like that my co-op in particular like found a hard time incorporating those competencies. I just like wondering how you think like we could like bring that into the fold.
So like one book that we've been hounded on ever since the first day of university by Forsberg was teaching TPSR. So teaching personal and social responsibility through physical activity. And so there's different levels of that, but it's really about the students being kind of responsible for themselves, responsible for their class, responsible for people around them, and then how we get like students to mature into those like active like people like throughout the like physical activity. So like when it comes to that, there's usually like a skill component, or I know like at least in my past like been marked on skills, and then on top of that during my pre-internship actually, students actually marked relationship or their social responsibility, kind of like 1 out of 10 or whatever, and then they backed it up with like why here, blah 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 blah, and then they would hand it into the like teacher, and then like teacher would be like, okay, well like I think you're at an 8 instead of a 9 or something, and then this is why, and then kind of like have that dialogue back and forth, so that kind of there is assessment as learning too, right? I'm not 100% certain if they took it in for summative or formative marks, but and then with technology too, I know some of my friends that were in their internship, they had like students with their phones just running around in the gym like this, and some schools they have like policies against it, but like phones are going to be here to stay, and there's tons of different apps and different like programs out there that you can get for your phones or laptops. Like MyFitnessPal is a good one. There's a couple where it actually like, I can't remember the names, but like shows you a workout, gives you like the tips, like performance cues for it, and like common errors, stuff like that. But yeah.
There's also like you can also use this because some in the wellness 10 curriculum there's some like outcomes that deal with like utilizing technology. So even having students like whip out their phone, say if you're in like the weight room that day and you just like let's film your partner doing a deadlift, and like you give them like tell them what was going wrong, where they can improve, things like that. And then also one thing I saw that was starting to be utilized at the school I was at was like Flipgrid. So like when they did have to, and so Flipgrid's basically like a vlog thing, like so you get like 1 minute and 30 to like respond to a prompt or like film yourself doing an activity or like to convey information. So they would, instead of like handing out like exams within the class, it was more like, or like within the phys ed class, they were like, so like what's one strategy that we could utilize within territory invasion games to create space for ourselves. And then it was like, so the students would respond to that prompt and then they would give a visual representation of how that would look. And I think that was like a good way to like utilize those phones instead of just having them like everyone come up and tell you that, or have them write it down on a piece of paper, which kids, if you tell them to do that while they're in the gym, they get really angry at you.
Yeah, they do.
Like, they want to be in there and be active and doing stuff. So like I think that's a great way we can bring in those technologies. And then with that, you bring in that like collaborative piece, because students have to work together to come up with an idea. They're creating these like concepts for themselves, and then they're communicating it through a digital format to like other people. So I think that's a great way to bring in 21st century competencies within our assessment. So
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. And like you said, phones are here to stay, so that's why I think it's really important to like actually teach students how to use technology properly, as I feel like they're just kind of growing up with it, but they're not actually like learning responsibility. So that's
back to the TPSR.
Yeah, teaching TPSR.
I know. Like I know with a couple of educators in the city with phys ed, they use Google Classroom. So like even that, just organizational wise, like it's kind of also hitting that the competencies. Because like some of the more traditionalist like educators in the city, they literally just have a list of like, or a calendar on their door where it's like, okay, we're snowshoeing today, then we're Cooper Run, which don't do fitness testing, by the way. That's not in the curriculum any way, shape, or form. But yeah, so like it's just kind of interesting to see, and like the students, they know how to use Google Classroom. They've been, for sure, like they've been exposed to it as like in elementary school most of the times, or something close to it, and then you can kind of use that to like get assignments in. You can do class polls on like, hey, here's your 2 options, or like here are the 3 possible assessment types or end products that you can hand in. Pick one, and like so it's a really valuable tool, and I'm really happy to see it actually being kind of implemented into physical education programs.
Because there is a push for like multi-literacy, so like in the phys ed classroom, like you're incorporating like physical literacy, your like written literacy, as well as like now you have like this technological, like with multi-modalities and stuff like that being thrown in. So kids have a lot to like navigate, and it's like I think it's our job to like kind of help them like find up their path and how to like navigate that digital space, and how to like use multiple literacies for the real world and apply it to their lives and stuff.
Exactly. And I had an experience at Tom where they had in the gym, they actually had like a projector, so like easily you could make your students do like a dance unit. So you might teach them for a few days, and then they have to collaborate together, be creative, and communicate and create their own dance, videotape themselves, have them project it, and then the other people in the class can like go along with it and they can teach it. So like that's just like a way of just like actually implementing it.
Yeah, so just out of curiosity, what do you think are some like inherent like structural issues with some of the traditional forms of assessment? Like I know I touched on like a little bit earlier, just very shortly, fitness testing and phys ed, and how it's not used in the curriculum at all, and a bunch of studies has shown that it's actually very detrimental to students, because it just puts them more on display, especially if you have one student going at a time, just like literally one, everybody else watching. I've heard tons of stories about that, but I feel like a lot, just staying on that like kind of point, I feel like a lot of kind of more traditional educators, they say like it's for formative assessment, and like but like it kind of switches into like summative when it's like done for like, did you progress, like, and then students know that. Like I could name off like a huge list of like actual people that like purposely tanked the first one because they knew it wasn't for marks then, and they knew that the next one they were gonna do was gonna be for marks, and like that's how you kind of cheat the system, right? And so like that also kind of comes back to keeping assessment reliable and like actually valid, because you want to be assessing like
Yeah, you want them to
stuff that's
actually
there.
focus on something to like get something better. So
Yeah.
you want to show them the importance of doing that. You don't want them to, you don't want to single them out and make them shy away from phys ed, as that's not like the reason we're doing it. We're teaching them so that they can become like physically literate and actually enjoy it.
Yeah.
I think like with the traditional forms of assessment, there's like a lack of like, what would you like say, authenticity in a way of like making it relevant to the student, and I can do a bunch of push-ups, but like what is that, what did I learn from that, what am I getting out of this experience? And like so I feel like the inherent issue with a lot of traditional assessments is like that lack of authenticity and flexibility, and it's a very rigid structure, and it's like very streamlined, whereas I feel like assessment should be more of like a flow and a path along like a continuum of learning instead of just like a one destination.
I like that. I've never thought about that like that. Alright.
Do you want to get into like some of the questions we have?
Sure. So this one kind of fits. How can we view assessment from a more holistic viewpoint?
So like when it comes to like, I'm thinking right now particularly wellness time, just because I taught that class in my pre-internship. So like with that, like they have overarching kind of outcomes that like everything is getting pulled back to. I know like when we're doing our like formative pieces, like with each of our lessons, we want to make sure it's connected to the indicators, and you always want to connect it to your real life situations, and you always want to connect it back to something that they've learned prior into the class. And so if we do that, like each lesson, like let's say I'm teaching you like numbers, so like count to 3, so like number 3, okay, so like we learned like you have 3 juice boxes or something like that for lunch, so like pull it back to that and like just keep on building onto there. And then when it comes to the bigger summative pieces, I feel like if you have kind of a relation or kind of an ebb and flow from summative assessment to summative assessment to summative assessment, then it kind of makes more sense for the students so they can see their own growth. I'm not saying that the assessment has to be the exact same, but like you want to kind of have some form of structure for the students. Kind of always have maybe like a same question that they need to answer at the end, like how does this relate to you as a person, so on and so forth, something along that line. And just making sure that each of these outcomes and indicators are talked about, they're all connected to each other, because really if you can't connect the content of a course, is it really a course?
Yeah, it's not going to make sense to
Exactly.
them.
It's just going to be like just a bunch of little separated things, and they're not going to be able to connect like what's up there, and it's all going to be memorization. It's not going to be any of the higher order thinking skills, right? And that's what we really want to focus in on with our students.
Yeah, you can't teach them, or you can't test them on something you haven't taught them. So
Exactly. Just for you quickly, how can you ensure the alignment between curriculum and your like assessments?
Yeah, so that was like one of the issues. Like this year we had to do a lot of like year and unit planning, and a lot of the feedback that I got on my stuff was that like what you're assessing is not lining up with the outcomes and indicators. And I thought, like thinking back on that, I'm like, that's pretty unfair to the student, and like I think we need to make sure that when we're creating our assessments, we create like, because each indicator has like a list of like verbs and stuff that kind of tie back into Bloom's taxonomy. So we want to make sure that when we're creating our assessments that they're reflecting back onto those indicators, and we can utilize those like verbs and things like that to feed into our thing. And then that way, as like Emily said, you can't assess them on what they don't know. So we can't like put an assessment out and then have it completely miss the learning outcome, because we usually like with 3-year formative assessments and stuff like that, you're working towards learning, working towards like the achievement of an outcome, and then all of a sudden your final formative assessment is just way off to the left base, and now students are kind of like, well, how does this relate to the content, right? So I just think that's like kind of an important thing that like for me personally I need to focus on, and that like just like being more critical of like making sure that they do have an alignment and make sure that students have like a fair chance at it, and then throwing in like all those other pieces of like being able to differentiate assessment and giving students opportunities to demonstrate learning is important.
Yeah, no, I feel that like that. I got that feedback also when it came to year planning, unit planning. Basically, like, yeah, like I really kind of started looking at the curriculum, and I like for an assessment, I would literally have like I really like reflections. I like them as an educator. I don't like them as a student. But literally looking through like an outcome, and like if you have a kind of a reflection on it and be like, hey, okay, so like this is for marks, blah blah blah. You can go through each of the indicators, and you can literally take that indicator, mold it into a question that keeps the same depth and breadth, and then your student has the opportunity to show, right?
Yeah.
And so like that's what I really kind of started to do, and like that'll be a nice like kind of starting point for me, just to make sure that it's all still connected, and like my assessment isn't like way out of left field.
I like what you said about the depth and breadth too, like because we do have like certain professional abilities to modify indicators. Like we have to still teach them because to get the whole like picture of that outcome, but like we can modify it to be more relevant to the students, so we can make that like connection to them, but still keep the depth and breadth. I think that was like a really good point.
Yeah. And I feel like if we modify it, it's including their interests more, and so they're actually more interested in learning, and they reach the outcome better.
Yeah, that ties back into like assessment as learning, right? And like the different types of assessment, because like really, like some like you should care how you get there, but like how you get there for one class or for one student is going to be totally different than how you do it for the other. So like as long as we get them to understand kind of the indicators, and they're able to like actually communicate that to us in a way that they're comfortable with, really, like, do we have to worry about how the process happens as long as it happens?
Yeah.
Right?
No, I agree.
And like, yeah, sure, some ways might be easier for us as educators, but like, is that really the best way for our students? And like, that's where we have to come into like an actual conversation with our students and like have that two-way kind of feedback.
I don't think we're in this for it to be easy. We're in it to like teach. Like we're in it to like help students learn. That's why I go into it. I'm not in it for like an easy ride.
Oh yeah.
Like so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I'm not in it for a mansion. I just want to retire, have a boat, and go fishing.
Okay, so Emily, you mentioned in your video that you would have students assess each other through like checklists. And then one thing I was just thinking is like, how do you plan to make sure that your students aren't just like faking it and giving like their partner a higher grade than they deserve and kind of cheating the system in that way?
So with that, I feel like it's very easy to cheat the system, like we kind of talked about before. So I feel like you almost just have to like be creative, and like you just have to know your students, so you know which ones might be more honest and which ones might not be, so you can kind of keep your eye out on the ones that might not be, or you can maybe either have them do it like at the beginning, so make sure they do it, and then have like another activity at the end, so they do it, and like partners, they check it off, and then they have to come to you, and then you make sure it actually aligns up with how they're doing it and that they can actually do it. That way you can also give them guidance before they go off and do the next activity that you have planned. So just things like that. I just feel like as a phys ed teacher, it's more of a learning process when you actually do it. You'll just kind of learn and adapt the more you kind of implement these formative assessments and stuff.
So like, okay, so like, one thing I thought about a lot was kind of self-assessment and peer assessment, and like whether or not that should be taken in for marks. Personally, I think it should just be a formative kind of feedback. Especially like, just like you know where they're at, you can like tell like, okay, like is the student actually putting in thought and being realistic about the mark they give? Are they kind of like giving themselves a hard time on the mark? Like so on and so forth, and then you can open that conversation with them, right? That's the one thing I want to kind of like just stay away from. Also participation marks, because like that's I might say like there's participation marks, but like really there's not. Then just be like you just get to class.
That kind of goes back to the TPSR part where it's like teaching them responsibilities, like actually want to get to know this, and if they need help to come up to you and ask, or if you see that they're doing it wrong, you can correct them.
Yeah, I agree that that self and the peer assessment thing, that should be a formative process. I believe I find it really helpful, like as a student myself, like when I do get peer feedback, I get to like see like how I was looking at it. Maybe like someone else comes with fresh eyes and like, oh, here's that, and I think that really ties into like in the real world, like this like idea of like collaboration and communication with each other. Like it gets students kind of in that idea of like it's like a community of learning. And so like it's like if I have some kind of issue, I can go to my friend and I can be like, hey, do you mind like looking over this? Maybe you have some ideas to give, and maybe I can have some ideas to give to you and stuff like that. So I don't think it should be for grades, like the peer and that. So.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like with that too, like we had a mentoring program or whatever. So we had students, or actually university students that finished their internship. They are back here for classes just finishing up, and they kind of every Wednesday morning they'd be paired up with some of us in the phys ed program that are going into the pre-internship, and they would kind of share back and forth. And so like they weren't really marked on it, or no, I think they were. Yeah, no, they got kind of peer assessed and self-assessed. So like, yeah, it's kind of interesting to see like kind of also the clashes between philosophies on assessment. Like some people have great philosophies on assessment, like theoretically, but when they try to like put it into work, like where'd it go?
Yeah, it doesn't always work out, or they don't implement it.
And so like I think when it really comes down to when it comes to assessment, like yes, you gotta like talk the talk, but like if you don't walk it, like
what's the
point? Like yeah, you're gonna like make it look all pretty and sound nice, but if you don't actually dive into the deeper, more complex like parts of it, then
Well, we're at 32 minutes. So
oh my!
I think that was a good way to end it.